Welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 23. Tonight I'm going to be talking about a shoot I did for Crust Bakery. In fact, a couple of shoots I've done for them. Also, later on I will be doing feedback and critique, where we will be talking about... wrong one. That's the one I want. Right, there's one of the pictures from the Crust Bakery. Also, Eamon wants to know how he could have cropped his deer shoot differently, or what he might have done with it. Stacey wants to know about the shadowing happening in the pergola, and what could be done about it. VG she's been asking about photographing towers and minarets. And Gary is asking about the Orton effect on photos. So all that's coming up in a little while. So the first thing to really say is here we are live on Facebook. Welcome. Thank you for joining me. If you're here, let me know. Leave a comment. It's always good to know there's people actually out there. And I'm not just talking into a camera with nobody listening at all. If you're new here, then, first time or even second time, just let me know where you're from. It's always lovely to know where in the world people are tuning in from. Leave comments, ask questions, and we'll get the conversation going. Now, I don't watch the comments necessarily live as they appear, because that tends to throw out my pace a little bit, but I will be stopping periodically as we go and checking in on the comments. So please leave your comments, and I will get to see them, and if you've got any questions, I will hopefully be able to answer them. So that's pretty much that. If you find these podcasts interesting and you would like to support them, then over on the right of the screen, as you look at it, you'll see go to buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres, where you can leave a wee donation, which helps support the podcasts. So I think that's pretty much the intros out of the way. So what I want to talk about this evening then is, well, first of all, I'm going to talk about the shoot I did for Crust Bakery. Now, Crust Bakery is let's throw up that photo here. So it's a bakery in Castle Douglas, in the town that I live in southwest Scotland. Now, essentially what happened was Tom and Pavlina first started doing that. This is Tom here, and wife Pavlina, and they started up Crust from their garage out into the back of the garden off to the side of the house. It was, a creation of love, really. There was nothing pappy about the bread. The bread that Tom started baking was really, it's organic ingredients, it's made with love, it's made with expertise, and it's really rich, wholesome, and incredibly tasty. And it wasn't long before they started supplying quite a few of the local places, Whole Food shops, and a couple of restaurants and what have you, with their bread. And all was going well, and then disaster struck. There was basically a fire in the garage burnt down, they lost all the equipment, and it was a really tough time. The whole business that they'd been getting going was just gone, just like that. So they went quiet for a little bit, and then suddenly we all noticed a Kickstarter campaign had been started up. So they decided that what they would do is to see if they could raise money to buy some equipment to kind of refurbish and start again. And in the way of Kickstarter campaigns, if you donated a certain amount, then you would be entitled to loaves of bread once they were up and going again. A sign of just how well loved they are, how well loved their bread is that within a week they'd hit their target. And this went on, and over a month they raised a considerable amount more money than they ever set out to. And this changed the options that they had. So rather than just re-kitting out a burnt out garage, they realised that they could maybe come into the town itself. And so they managed to find a property, set up in the back, and start up a proper local bakery. Now, at the time of the Kickstarter project, I said to them, well, look, once you get going, just let me know, and I'm more than happy to help do a photo shoot for you. And so they've been going a few months and decided, this was the time to do it. So this is what I wanted to show you then, to start with, was, so I was back in 2016, I think. Actually, I should have the dates on there if I kick that. Yeah, August 2016. So 4 years ago, this photo was taken. And they'd not been long started, but we decided what we would try and do is a kind of staged scene. And it was lots of thought going into where everybody was going to stand, how it was going to be lit. Lighting was actually quite tricky to do because the ambient light, there wasn't really enough for the camera. Those who've been watching these podcasts for a while will know that I talk about, the problem is quite often your ambient light in a shop is enough for you to see with your eyes, that's fine, but the camera isn't anything like as sophisticated as your eyes. And so what happens is if you want to have a good quality photo, you have to have a low ISO setting. Otherwise, it ends up very noisy or grainy as soon as you try to blow it up to any size. So you make all the appropriate adjustments, but then what happens is it's too dark. There's not enough light getting in the camera. So the first thing I did was I set up a light over on one side, roughly over by this guy in the red shirt here. And to just give you a quick show of what that looked like, that's what it was pretty much like with just the single light going off. So there wasn't enough going there. So I set up another light over on the left, and without the light on the right, you can see that there's not enough there. But between the two of them, they would have been okay. But what I really needed was the back lit up. So I then had to put a flash in the back and boost that so that it was bouncing off all around the walls. And then at that point, we can go back to this shot. So now everything is lit how we wanted it. So then it's a case of trying to arrange everybody. And I wanted to have that sense of depth going back. So we wanted different people. So we've got a couple of customers. Pav is behind the counter. Tom's pulling the bread out. We've got their daughter sitting down, tucking into a piece of focaccia. And then in the back, we've got flour being placed over the top of something and a big bag of organic flour being brought in from the back storage area. So there's layers going back through the photo which draw you in and make you realise that it's a size and it's busy and there's a lot going on. So that was the plan, that was the shoot. Had a fun kind of afternoon. The thing is once they got the bakery going, they then had so much more to expand on. It wasn't just bread. They were into their quiches, croissants, rolls of various kinds, puddings, focaccias. Oh, they're focaccias. And all sorts of different kinds of breads as well. Their sourdough is absolutely legendary. Baguettes are amazing. So, and the great thing about doing a photo shoot, we did this one on a Saturday afternoon, partly because it was at this point it was fairly quiet in the week. We didn't have to worry about too many customers coming in. But it also meant that because they didn't open till Tuesday, there was a whole bunch of produce that was, kind of being left over at the end of it. So I had armfuls of the stuff to bring back with me as well. I do love these kind of shoots, I have to say. So we did that shoot, and that was great. That went well. And they went on over the next couple of years they won award after award after award. The BBC Radio 4 Food and Farming Awards, and it's sort of so it went on. And then so a couple of years later, they were then going to be featured in a book which was all about the best bakers in Europe. So at this point they needed a fresh set of photos. On top of that, they'd now grown significantly with what they were producing. And this counter here, when I look at this counter here, it looks quite sparse with what I've now become used to seeing. So I embedded myself there pretty much for most of the day, and I took a whole bunch of photos, as well as counter photos. I took photos of sort of at work, serving, close-ups of food, and it was a lot of fun. So at this point, though, I do remember when we wanted the group shot. So this group shot here is sort of where we've got everybody lined up. As you can see, the counter is now much fuller. They've got stands in order to start packing stuff up. They've got a fridge over on the left, all sorts of produce down on the right there. This was lit in a similar way. I had 2 lights at the front, light in the back so we could see, that there was much more of the shop than just the front part of it. This shot, though, was considerably harder to pull off, because by now, for this shot, they wanted to have the most number of staff in the shot. And the staff kind of come and go during the day, obviously depending on how busy it is. And so the busiest time of the day tends to be sort of around 12, 1 o'clock. And so that's when they have the most staff. But that meant trying to take the photo meant I was taking the photo at the busiest part of the day as well. And so I would sort of be sitting there watching very carefully, waiting for a slight lull, and then people wouldn't come in, and I'd rush out and I'd stick the lights up. But before I'd finished putting the lights in place, suddenly you get a couple more people coming in, and I had to push them to one side. Anyway, we did manage to get there, shoot off a few quick shots, get the kind of one we want, and so that was fun. During the rest of the time, then I was taking other shots of them. So sort of shots of the produce here, behind the seat, or behind the counter serving. Quite like this. This is one of the really busy parts where you can see all the servers down one side, all the customers down the other. Another nice little kind of angle shot, which is showing you behind the shop. So actually, when I was taking the photo, I was pretty much, where are we? Standing in this doorway with the camera in order to look across and get them all lined up. And more shots of the produce there. And and then we could do close-up ones as well. This kind of shot is kind of classic. What am I using? That's a f3.2, so very wide aperture, gives a very shallow depth of focus, and you get really nice sharp detail on some bits, just where the light is glistening off the sausage rolls and the bits of pastry and the seeds, and the rest of it sort of falling back into soft focus. Other version, here, there, all that chocolate and orange tart. As somebody that's a bit of a foodie, just even kind of looking through all these photos does kind of set me off. So this I was doing these kind of shots, and then but specifically for the book, what we also needed was some portraits of Tom at work. We needed this kind of classic baker's portrait, so to speak. So by mid to late afternoon, everything was dropping off, and I went round to the back part of the kitchen to take some shots. So here we have that kind of, this one where you've got Tom looking straight into the camera, dough in his hands, workbench in front of him, food behind him, all lit up to kind of get the shadows, and he's giving me a really lovely, warm, friendly smile. So that's your kind of classic portrait shot for when they need it for magazines or a little bit of promotion, and you want the eye contact. But then we also decided to get some of him at work itself. So this one, I have to say, is one of my favourites. It looks like he is levitating the bread through thought and power alone. But yeah, obviously he was, bashing the bread around, throwing it, tossing it, and I just managed to kind of catch this one mid-air as such. This one, I think he was making all butter croissants. That is literally a rolled out slab of butter being placed in the dough before he starts rolling it up and stretching it and doing all sorts of bits and pieces for it. And also did some kind of close-up shots where you're kind of getting the hands right in. So he's folded now the dough over the butter before he starts folding it again and again and what have you. So this was really what the shoot was about. It really is an amazing place that really does amazing food, and the thing is about it is it's the kind of food which once you've had you can't go back. You go to the supermarkets and they've got their finest range, Sainsbury's finest or Tesco's finest or whatever, and it's not a patch on the food that you get here. During lockdown, they were obviously closed for a little bit. They're now open to an extent. They're hoping to open up the cafe again fairly soon. But certainly they've been missed. And they've also started doing pizza nights on Friday night. So if you happen to be near Castle Douglas, in and around or nearby, do check out their website. Just type in the Earth's Crust Bakery, you'll find it. When I put this up on the YouTube bit, I'll add a link in to the site. So check out. They're now doing a pizza night on Fridays, which I haven't had a chance to go to myself, but I do hear wonderful things about, and it is on my list of things to do fairly soon. Right, okay, so I wanted to tell you a little bit about that. It was a kind of fun shoot. So what I'll do now is just flip over to, I'll close all these hundreds of little windows here and flip over to Facebook and see if we have any comments. Oh, we have comments. Oh, that's lovely. Right, okay, what have we got? So Stacey, good afternoon, Kim. Afternoon, it's evening here. Right, well, Stacey's over in America, Pennsylvania, I think. Maggie, good evening. Good evening, Maggie. That's my wife. She's just upstairs. Pat signed in already on another page. All right, okay. Brian, hi, Kim. Good to be with you again. Great you could make it back, Brian. Prasad, hi again, Prasad from Dubai. Hi, Prasad. Glad you could make it. Pamela, watching from Selkirk, Manitoba, Canada. Canada, right, okay. Gary, hello from the High Peak District in England. That's a lovely corner of the country, that is. I'll be looking at one of your pictures later, Gary. Becca, evening all. Hi, Becca, glad you could make it. Fiji, good evening, Fiji in India. Be looking at one of your pictures too. Sheila Farris, hi Sheila, feeling hungry now? Yeah, I know, I had dinner not too long ago, and it's always a danger me bringing out those photos, it really sets me off. Pat, nice premises, yes, absolutely, they've really done them up beautifully. And of course what I've not even told you about is the smells. Can you imagine the moment you step into that place, you're just hit with the smell of fresh bread, fresh out the oven, warm baking, it's just... Maggie, now you're just teasing us. Yes, I absolutely am. And Stacey, we have two interesting bakeries in our area. I love breads, and the one makes specialised cakes, so this is interesting. Our town bakery has been on TV. Small town bakeries are homey, regardless. Good shots. Just a little too far for delivery being overseas. Yes. This is true. Well, that's great. That always makes me feel good. We've got a crowd here. We've recognised most of the names. So, yeah, lots of fun. Quick sip. Right, okay. Well, then let's move on to the... Oh, Mandy's just come in. Hi, Kim. Hi, Mandy. Glad you could make it too. So, excuse me. Let's move on then, and we'll start with the photo. So who are we going to start with? Okay, Stacey, we'll start with you. So let's see. Stacey sent me a couple of photos, starting with this one and also this one. So what Stacey said was, this is what happened when I shot the photograph when my nephew, his fiancée, was standing directly under the pergola. Pergola? Pergola? I'll go with pergola for the moment, and everybody who pronounces it differently can throw their hands up in horror. I was wondering if this could be fixed, and could it look good in black and white? Can it be fixed? When you say fixed, are you meaning then removing those shadows? You say of the second photo, where are we? No, not that. I'm going to come back to that. This one, this was a bit better. Blah, blah, blah. It was in front of the pergola, not under it. Brittany's 6 foot, Dustin is 5'9". Okay, so Brittany is obviously taller than Dustin. Okay, so you brought that to my attention. Okay, well, let's first of all just talk a little bit about height difference then. The question of that is, does anybody mind? Some people do, some people don't. If you do have a slight problem when you're photographing people of considerably different heights, but you're both wanting them in a photo without somebody obviously standing on a box, really the best thing to do is have them sitting down, by and large. I mean, if we look at the difference here between, say, Dustin and Brittany. So yes, Brittany might be taller than Dustin, but she is all legs. If we look at the top of her hips, which is sort of somewhere around here, they are probably, you know, a good 6 to 8 inches above the hips of Dustin. And I can understand that. I'm not even as tall as Dustin. I'm 5'6.5", and the half matters. From the waist up, I have the body of someone who should be 6 foot tall, but my legs are 6 inches too short. And and it's not just some excuse. Part of the reason I know this is because my stepson Rory is 6 foot tall, but if we're sitting on a bench together, I'm actually taller than he is. I'm all upper body and really short legs. Rory has much longer legs. And clearly with this, Brittany has longer legs than Dustin. But it looks like probably Dustin's got the bigger body. So my guess is, if they were sitting on a bench or a seat of some kind, he will probably appear taller than her. So if you're wanting to get the height differential sorted out, then I would say sit them down. But only if that, I only mention that because, I mean, some people aren't bothered. You've mentioned it in your writing, so I'm guessing that that was on your thought, part of your thoughts. Now, the other question was this one. Now, you're saying, can it be fixed? Could it look good in black and white? Well, you can always change it to black and white. I'm less certain about it. Can it be fixed? I'm guessing it's the shadows, because I think last week in the comments, if I remember rightly, you mentioned about the fact that you had a picture of a pergola and the shadows were getting in the way. Now, the tricky bit here is, on a direct level, if you mean get rid of the shadows, in post-production, no, not really. I mean, there might be ways of doing it. It will take you hours. You're really going to have to know what you're doing, and at that point you have to think, is it worth it? If you want a nice picture of the lovely couple, to be honest, that's going again, clicking that way, that's a nice photo. Now you can straighten that, you can crop into that, you know, I mean, quite simply, you know, coming in a little bit closer like that gives a quite a nice kind of family photo feel. looks like she's being squashed somewhat, but you play around with that. But as for this photo, the thing is with the shadows, what you've got to think of, Stacey, is in a case like this, trying to Photoshop out patterned shadows afterwards is an absolute nightmare, because what are you going to do? You're going to, I mean, in this case will be, you would have to section off each light part and then darken it, or section off the dark parts and lighten them and then hope they would match up. But there's also a kind of crossover bit where you see where the light hits the dark, you've got like a kind of barrier bit, you know, of kind of a little bit of leeway, so that bit is going to end up being different. So you would be pixel pushing, and to be honest, it's not worth it. What I would say though is when there are shadows, when there are patterned shadows, what you really want to be thinking is, can I make a feature of it? And I think that's really where the power of, you know, shadows can be amazing fun. I don't have a shot with gridded shadows like this, but what I do want to show you is I do have a couple of photos where I've used blinds, Venetian blinds, which, you know, are layered like that rather than across the way. And you can create some really nice kind of moody atmospheric effects like that. This one is a self-portrait I did, well, that was 4.5, nearly 5 years ago. Hair's a little bit thicker then, a little bit darker. And so for this, as you can see, the sun was coming through the window, and it creates a sort of, and doing this in black and white again. In black and white, what you're doing is you are emphasizing the texture that seems to come from having the shadow lines. And by having a kind of dark background, the light coming through, contrasting the shadows, I think it can create quite a nice kind of moody effect. I using exactly the same set of blinds, totally different shoot. I did with Denise. I did this shoot, and it was at the same window. This wasn't the purpose of the shoot. We'd been doing a different photo shoot, but I suddenly noticed that the way the sun was kind of coming through the blinds, I thought, well, okay, let's just do a quick shot, see if this works. So she knelt down at the windowsill, leaned into it, and you can see the lines coming across her. I really like this. I was really pleased with this photo. I mean, it was taken in colour, but as soon as I turned it into black and white and then started playing with the contrast, I felt it's got some really interesting depth and mood to it. Black and white always makes things slightly moodier, or can at least make things slightly moodier. You know, the fact she's not smiling into the camera, she's just looking straight into it. It's partly to do, I mean, certainly with these ones here, part of it is also to do with the strong use of diagonals. For those who've been watching any number of these for any reasonable length of time will know that I talk a lot about diagonals, how diagonals add tension, movement, energy into a picture. And because we've got all these really strong diagonals coming from the top left, top right down to the bottom left, but it's also counteracted by her arm, it's going diagonally in the other direction, her head is tilted. You get a sort of sense of, there is an energy there. She's not smiling into the camera, but she is looking intensely into the camera. And that kind of combination, I think, is quite mesmerizing. So I would say, so to go back, Stacey, to your bit about the pergola, I would say play with, if you've got interesting shadows coming through, can you play with them? Look for ways to actually use those shadows. And if in the end you feel that, well, they're just getting in the way, then don't use them. You know, like you did with the other photo, step them forward out of it, shoot from a different angle. The question is why were they in the pergola? What were you hoping to use it for? Did you want that kind of lighting, or was it more just about sort of being framed within a shape? What would have happened if you'd stood the other side of the pergola and shot them? Or what would have happened if you waited till the sun had moved around a little bit? So shadows are one of these things where they're either working for you or they're working against what you're trying to achieve. So part of that is knowing what you want to achieve, or the other part is just seeing if there's things you can do because it's an opportunity you didn't think about that's been presented to you. So just play with it. I think any time you get interesting shadows, it's always worth, fine, go ahead and take the main photo that you want, but if you've got the time, then turn around and say, well, look, if we've got another 5 minutes, do you mind if we sort of play around with these shadows, move them backwards and forwards, see what you can do? And then quite often, if you do have these interesting patterns, then yes, sometimes black and white can work, because you can then make a stronger contrast between the light and the dark and make a feature of that extra layer of texture that comes from the shadows. So I hope that helps, Stacey, gives you a few ideas. Right, let's close those. Flip back to Facebook. What have we got? So a little bit of comment here, took from the ground. Stacey says, you're taller than me. Okay, so you're shorter than 5'6". Okay. Gary, could you do a composite with the pergola shots, swapping the heads? I was okay, right, okay, I get what you mean there, Gary. For a moment I'm thinking, what, put Dustin's head on Brittany's shoulders and the other way around? That's just going to look weird. But no, I see what you mean. What you're talking about is taking the shot of Gary's head where he's standing in front of it and place it on the head behind. I suppose that's possible. A lot's going to play around, depend on how the lighting and the shadow fits as to whether you want to do that. Stacey said I did a small composite adding the top of the pergola. Okay, and Stacey likes the portraits that I've done. And you wanted to frame them. Okay, fair enough. So let's move on. So the next one, I think what we'll talk about is, let's talk about Eamon here. So Eamon has sent me a, oh, press the wrong button there. Okay, so Eamon has sent me a picture, and let's flip this over here. So he sent me these pictures of deer and said, a day trekking around the woodlands to get a few images of deer. It would be interesting to see how you would crop this image, taken with a 550D and an 18 to 400 millimeter Tamron lens. 18 to 400 millimeters. That's a real. 18 millimeters is pretty much wide angle, and 400 is really big zoom. So it gives you a lot of flexibility. You can shoot from right back, and then you can zoom right in. Okay, so this was the photo that Eamon has cropped and he put in. But what he also did do was he sent me his original. So if I flip over to here and drag this one in here. So that's the original shot, as opposed to, okay, let's open that one in Photoshop as well. So that's how he's cropped it. So let's go back to the original and let's read that again. So interesting to see how I would crop this image. Well, I think the first thing that we've got here, Eamon, is that it does feel quite unbalanced the way you've cropped it. We've got the grayer of the two deer here, sort of sitting 2/3 of the way across. That's kind of okay, but then the browner deer feels like it's been forced into the side of the photo. The balance doesn't really feel quite like it's there. So, and the other problem that we've really got is the fact that they are heads away from each other. So what's happening with the look of this is you're getting drawn to the outsides rather than them looking in. You go along the back of one deer and follow the head, and that's pushing you out the side. One side of the photo, or along the back of the other, the deer up the head, and that's kind of pushing you out the other side of the photo. So everything feels like it's pushing you away rather than drawing you in. So if we go back to here, that's actually giving you a little bit more space. Now, it all feels, here it's pushed down into the bottom right corner a bit. So probably a slightly better way of cropping maybe is to, let's just angle that a little bit. And if you have something like that, now you've got a bit more balance in the photo. We've got more space to the deer on the right here, more space to the deer on the left over here. I quite like the yellow flowers in the foreground, but they do grab the attention as well, being very bright. So that's one way you could crop it. And I mean, again, if we do just a very quick, let's do a very quick kind of edit where you maybe, let's brighten it up a little bit and pull the highlights down, so a little bit of vignette, bring the attention back into it, and then play around with the clarity a little bit, something like that. Boost. And you know, we've got then a little bit more attention being brought into it, but we still have it is a bit of a problem though, in the fact that in the end, part of you've got quite a gap between, you know, there's possibly, you know, the gap. Let's just show you here. No, not that one. Just put a pencil tool here. The gap between the deer here and the deer here, you can see that this bit here is probably something like about 20% of the whole photo. But because of the heads, really, we look at the head, we've got one head here and we've got one head here. So it feels like the gap is sort of about this big. And at that point, you know, more than half the photo is taken up. But even if we go back to, you know, again, even with as much of this to here, that's still at least half the photo is taken up with a gap between the heads. So it is a tricky one, really. In an ideal world, I think what you really want to do is kind of swap them around or drag one over. I mean, let me just show you briefly. Let's just cut out for a moment this deer here. So I'm going to copy that, paste, and move the deer over here. And then what we can also do is we'll just get rid of this one. And so now you've got the deer over here, and now see what happens if we crop it in a bit like we did before, with a similar amount of space that we had either side, and zoom in, and then maybe do that little filter thing. Can you see how much difference that makes? You know, that by having their heads next to each other, it makes a huge difference in the fact that you get drawn right into the photo now. You feel that you've come into something that they might have been in conversation with each other or just chatting or what, you know, whatever you might think deer get up to. But the fact is that there feels like there's a really strong relationship between them. And I suppose there's an important thing here about the notion of the relationship between different objects or subjects within a photo. A few weeks ago you sent me a photo of a single deer. So everything was about the deer and then its interaction with the surroundings. Here we've got two deer. And the minute you introduce a second subject, then the relationship between the two of them becomes really important. And it's why if we go back to this version of the photo, the relationship isn't there. It's sort of, everything is sort of pushing us away from these two. Whereas if we kind of pull in together, that there now feels like there's a much stronger relationship between the two of them. So part of the photography, part of when you're out there taking the photo, yes, you're trying to capture a deer. That's great. You caught, you saw them, you got the photo. But if you're trying to shift it up to the next level, which is to say, well, how can I make this interesting? You need to be thinking about, if I've got 2 deer in the image, what's the relationship between the 2 of them? Could you have waited till they've moved around a little bit? Could you, or I get it, right? I can imagine, they're both looking at you. Probably 2 seconds later, they turned and ran, because that's what deer tend to do, unless they are extraordinarily tame. So your options are pretty limited. But then it's that difference between, are you grabbing a photo just because, you were lucky enough to be there, you grabbed it, and you can feel satisfied that you grabbed it. And certainly if I had a photo, of a deer, there's so few about, I've got, most photos I've got of a deer tend to be at the back legs of it as it's just disappearing into the woods. So, I'd probably feel quite pleased with myself if I got any kind of photo. Certainly a photo of deer looking at the camera, I'd feel quite pleased. But it's not necessarily going to win any awards. It's the question between having a photo where you can feel, hey, I got that, or a photo where you want to show it off to other people and people go, ooh, and put it into competitions or whatever. And if you're trying to do that, if you're then into the realms of wildlife photography, and wildlife photography requires you going out and taking a lot of photos under a lot of different circumstances in the hope that some of them will work and most of them won't. You really do have to hunt for the photos. Watching some nature program the other night, David Attenborough voiceover, talking about how the big cats, the lions and the tigers and what have you, the vast majority of their hunts end in failure. 9 out of 10 times they chase the wildebeest or whatever, they don't get it. But they've only got to get that one in order to be able to feed them for the week. And I tend to think an awful lot of wildlife photographers are a bit like that, in that same kind of hunting way. You're out there looking for the right photo, and most of the time it gets away. Most of the time it doesn't work, but you keep at it. So you got the photo. Now, okay, here I've just photoshopped very quickly in it to give you a sense of how it might look better. But certainly with the crop, you want to be thinking about how you're balancing it out. So I hope that helps, Eamon. And thank you for sending it in. Right, okay. Let's just close those and flip back over to Facebook, see if we've got any more comments. Terry says llamas. They're llamas? I thought they looked like deer. Are they llamas? Hang on a sec. I've got to pull that photo up again. They look like deer to me. They do not look like llamas to me. I'm going to stick with deer. And Eamon says deer. So you can correct me later. Point me to the Google image that shows these ones looking like llamas. And so meanwhile, okay, so Terry, not sure whether it's the llamas, but thank you for joining me, by the way. Stacey, deer. The one called a fallow. One is called a fallow because it is an adult with spots. Okay, thank you. Pat, yes, the 2 llamas look lovely. Stacey, there is exchanging positions. Perfect. Right. Okay. Ray, brilliantly explained, Kim, and good to see the importance of the crop tool being emphasised too. Well, thank you, Ray. Much appreciated. Lol, they are fallow deer. Right. Okay. There you go. So more people in with the fallow deer than with the llamas. Paul Creswell's come in. Unfortunately, in wildlife competitions, you're not allowed to move them. Yeah. I know. You're right. Absolutely. I would be booted out of the camera club without a doubt. Fortunately, I only come and give talks to them. I don't actually have to enter the competitions. I would be completely and utterly disqualified. But no, the reality is, though, Paul, you're absolutely right. I mean, I wasn't swapping them to say, therefore, this photo is going to win me a competition. it was just purely to show how the composition massively changes the impact of the photo. As stated before, I'm not a wildlife photographer. I have huge respect for wildlife photographers. Personally, I've never had the patience for it. The idea of, sitting in a hide waiting for 3 hours for the bird to come down, or for the fox to appear, or for the badger to show up, or staying overnight to watch something. I get too bored, too irritable, too quickly. So the reason I do portraits is because I then can interact with people, and I do staged photos because if things aren't working as quickly as I want, I can go and move lights. I can ask people to move. My default way, my preference for photography is created photography rather than captured photography, because I don't have the patience to wait for all the conditions to get right in order to capture the perfect scene. I mean, I understand it, but and like I say, I have huge respect for the people who can do it, and the part of the respect comes from that because I can't really do it, because that's not really the way that I do it. Okay, yeah, Paul, not a criticism. I think it was much better moved. Yeah, I know, we're playing. Okay, thank you for that. So, next, let's see what we've got up next then. I think what I'm going to do now is, let's go for VG. Right, okay. So VG had sent me a couple of pictures of minarets, or minars, so what you say, minars or minarets, brackets towers as they are called. This was taken on a trip to Old Delhi in India. I wanted to capture the height of the tower. I'm interested to know how the tower could be effectively cropped. Made a bold attempt by cropping, but is it too abrupt? And when we right, so other pictures. That's just so she's sent this. That's taken from a slide. Yep, that one's standing back a bit, and she's made it black and white. This is zoomed in to crop. Okay, so that is that. Yes, that's cropped from this one, and we can tell because notice the little bird up in the corner there, which as we swap over to the cropped one is still in the corner there. And I must say, I do like the bird. Suddenly adds a little bit of scale, but I'll talk about that in a minute. And here's another one, another tower from a different angle, and likewise quite a few more birds in it. Okay, so what are we going to talk about here? The notion of you want to capture the height of the tower. And whether it's this one or this one, that one, it is tricky, and I'm sure we started talking about this once before, but probably in a different way, back fairly early on in one of the early episodes, VG, I think. The problem with standing directly under the tower is all you can do is creak your neck, point up and go click. And it's huge. Because you've moved around, because you've shifted you've seen it as you've moved closer to it, you've walked around it, you have a tremendous sense of the sheer scale of it. But a single image on its own isn't necessarily showing the scale of it. We don't really know how tall that is. It could be a lot, we can see brickwork in this, but we don't have a sense of necessarily how big the bricks are. If the bricks are very small, it might be quite a small tower and you just happen to be lying on the ground. Alternatively, these bricks could be each brick could be, huge, and, which would mean this is even bigger than we think it is. And by and large, the problem is when you're trying to get height, you need scale. You need something to place it against, which gives it a better sense of what's going on. What I wanted to do here, what I will do briefly, I want to show you a shoot. At some point in the future, I'm going to talk about a shoot I did. What did I really talk about? Did I talk about the shoot I did with Kasama? Can't remember now. If I haven't, I will do at some point. So it was a band that wanted to be shot next to these big radio masts up near Skyburn. And so here's the radio mast, and they wanted to have a photo of themselves initially up against it. Now, they'd already done this with one photographer. It hadn't worked, and so then they came to me to talk about, were there other ways they could do the photo shoot. And part of the problem was what they'd done was they'd gone and stood right under the tower. And the photographer that they were with was immediately up against this problem that if you wanted to include this huge tower and them, they were going to be tiny next to it. So you're not really going to get them in. So the next thing he did was pretty much what VG has done here, which is shot it from lying on the ground. But at that point, having the guys in the band standing there, he's sort of lying on the ground, looking up their noses. They're all leaning over him, thinking, what are you doing on the ground? And basically a combination of, not being sure quite what to do, of different egos getting in, or things getting in the way, people wanting to do different things, nobody really sure quite what they were doing. They didn't end up with a photo they wanted. So I was approached and asked, what can we do with this? And again, to go back then to this photo here, so you've got a radio mast tower here, but it's very difficult to have any sense of how big it actually is. So what you really need is, first of all, you need a context. So as you can see, if I stand back here, so, on the drive up to it, you can now see trees. You see the top of a building. And now at that point, although it's on, it's on top of the hill, you really get a much, much better sense of the height of it. So the height, even though for us, in terms of personal experience, we experience the height of something best if we're literally standing underneath it, because we are relating that to our own height. We know how tall we are, we know how far we're cricking our neck back, how far up that seems. It's huge. But the photo doesn't do that. For the photo, you need a different context, because the photo doesn't have the context that your brain does of you and that own awareness of your height. So you need something else to have against it that people can go, all right, I roughly know how big that building is. I know roughly how big that tree is. Or something which we can relate to, and then you get a sense of, so that means that tower is as big as that. In the case of the band photo, we were doing a setup where we then had the band sitting on a sofa, somebody's playing a guitar, somebody's eating a bag of chips, somebody's reading a newspaper, somebody's drinking alcohol, and we sort of had this semi-domestic scene with the sofa and the table and the radio. I think somebody was tuning the radio, with the mast behind them. And so with this in the foreground and that in the background, that was the kind of setup. But that then gives you, that way we were able to have the mast in the shot. We know it's a radio mast. We can see just how tall it is, but we were still able to get the band into the shoot. So basically, the best way of photographing towers tends to be at a distance with something else next to it, which is going to give you a bit of a scale. And sometimes if you can, if the tower is at that much of a distance, try and create something a bit more interesting in the foreground, which ideally is then relating to what's happening in the background as well. Or you have something which is in the background of the tower itself. You've got the tower and then you've got hills or mountains or a carnival or something else going on behind. So hope that gives you some clues there, VG, to play around with. In the case, the best way of getting the height of towers is about scale and having something to measure it against. Right. Okay, let's close those ones and flip back. Any more comments? Nothing immediately, or if there is, it's not showing up on It's not showing up on my comment base at the moment. That's that. Okay, Dumfries and Gunn. Okay, doesn't really matter. So, suddenly losing what page? When am I at? Oh, Stacey's just come in. This is great advice. Ah, well, thank you, Stacey. At least I also know that somebody is still listening. Right. Okay. So we'll now move on to the next picture, and this is for Gary. Now, this was an interesting one. So Gary says, I've been experimenting with the Orton effect to get that ethereal glow you sometimes see. I think you need to pick your subjects carefully and use it conservatively. Picture 1 is without the Orton process applied, picture 2 is with it. I wonder if you have any observations or tips. So let's show you what Gary was talking about. And let's with... Okay, so if I flip back here, so this is picture 1 without the Orton effect. This is picture 2 with the Orton effect. Now, for those who are maybe watching on slightly smaller screens and can't really see, what I will do here is just zoom in a bit. And what we've... Okay, let's flick back. You know, okay, we can't sort of do a zoomed in on both at the same time. But in essence, what's happening is there's a blurring, a slight blurring of a sort of haziness effect. Now, I recognise the effect. I have to say, I didn't know it was called the Orton effect. So I did what anybody does, and I went and Googled it. And that's fine. So basically what happened is it's called the Orton effect because of a photographer called Michael Orton who uses it a lot and kind of popularized it. Now he's done it much stronger than Gary's done it, but it's not particularly a new technique. It's just a technique that he was applying to landscapes. I've seen similar things done in photography. In fact, I think you can go back to Hollywood photography. He was trying to do a similar kind of effect 80 years ago, 70 years ago. Photoshop allows you to create it much more easily than, of course, doing it with negatives in a darkroom. But okay, let's talk about a little bit about what it is. So the best way of doing that, I think, is I'll show you briefly how it works. So let's take a photo. So here's a photo, stream with a bit of waterfall, autumn onset, late summer. Now, there's a particular reason I've chosen this photo, which will become clearer in a minute. So now there's a whole number of different ways you can play around with this in Photoshop. I'll just show you one version, which is one that I happen to know, which is relatively easy. So the first thing I'm going to do is duplicate the layer. And then what you do is you blur the second layer. Now, in your original darkroom technique, what happened was you would take two photos. You would take one photo where everything's pin sharp, and then you would take a second photo which is basically out of focus. Now you can vary this and how much out of focus you want. It's going to depend entirely on yours. You know, you can go to there and you can't really see anything. For this, I'm going to put it roughly about that kind of blurred state. Then the next thing you do is you overlay it on to the first one, and there's a number of different ways you can do this. If I'm in Photoshop, and there's a bunch of ways you can overlay one layer on top of another. So darken, multiply, color burn, linear burn, lighten, screen, a whole bunch. Anyway, what I'm going for here is overlay. Now this has also made it a bit too dark, so in between these I'm just going to use a levels layer, and I'm going to take the middle layer and shift it up from 1 to roughly about 2. And what we can see then, if I just group those two layers together. So this is the effect. So what's happening here, as well as the colours becoming a bit richer, what you might notice is there's this sort of glow to everything. or not quite everything, most things, or rather the light things. So where you really notice this glow is in the highlights. And that's a key thing here, Gary, to understand. So that kind of glow kind of feels, it makes it much more dreamy in a way. Now, you can increase the strength of that effect or decrease it. If I, hold on, undo that. Let's just drag the group. So from there, I can nudge it a little bit. I can make it very strong. I've got it pulled up to full so that you can kind of see it, but where you have it on there is a matter of personal taste. Certainly going and looking at Michael Orton's pictures, he took this effect and ramped it up massively. Now, the key thing about this is that the place where it has the most dramatic effect is in the highlights and not in the shadows. So if you've got an area of the photo which is being hit by dappled sunlight, then it becomes, that's the bit that's going to hit it. If you've got an area, even on a kind of dull day, but maybe you've got a damp bit of grass or something, you've got a little tussock over here, or you've got a bit of wet stone, where it's catching the light more, those are the bits that will glow. But you have to be kind of selective about it, because if you have a great big field and it's glowing, it's kind of overkill. What you're really wanting to do is get the select areas of it. So if we flip back, well, okay, let's go back to your picture here then, Gary. Let's open that with Photoshop. Now, the problem we have here is that there isn't really, the light isn't there to maximize the effect of this. The best thing to have done here would have been to take this photo on a sunny day, or even better, sometime near the golden hour when the sun was low in the sky. And then if the light was catching the edges of the gravestones, if you were getting long shadows and light streaks across the grass, then those are the ones that would be glowing. But instead, what happens with this is if we create exactly the same effect. So what I will do is just filter, add the same blur, put it down a little bit, and again, just take that levels in between, drag that up to about 2, and where were we? Overlay this. Now this is slightly stronger than the one that you did, but you can see what happens here. Oh, that's looking it's looking even darker. Might need to, we've lost the shadows somewhat in here. Maybe I just need to pull that up. It is more difficult to find the optimum place because there's a lot more shadow in this, but then where it is light, you've got all this grass, and all this grass here is kind of too much. At this point, we've lost, I mean, I can understand, maybe you've gone for this, you've got a slightly darker feel because you're going for a sort of slightly moodier, melancholic sense because it's gravestones. But we've not really got a place for that Orton effect glow to latch onto, because the primary points of this photo are the gravestones, but the gravestones aren't really getting the effect. What's getting the effect more than the gravestones is the grass, and the grass isn't the point of the photo. So this is really, one of the things I'm always talking about, which is understanding what's the point of the photo. Once you understand the point of it, once you understand the story you're trying to tell, then all the editing effects you do are there to emphasize that story. So if your story is about melancholic gravestones, if your story is about shape and line, depending on where your emphasis is, how is the light helping you to achieve the effect you want? How is the crop helping you achieve the effect you want? How is the angle of the camera helping you to achieve what you want? And then once you've got your photo and you take it and you place it into Photoshop or whatever other editing program you use, how is your editing helping achieve the effect you want? And sometimes we do have to be really careful that there's a particular effect which may seem like a fun effect and it's a quick fix. You click this button and it does it for you. But an effect can very quickly can feel a bit stale. It's a bit like when HDR, suddenly for the life of me, I can't remember what that means. Sure, somebody can put it in the comments for me. But the notion of overlaying 2 or 3 different images to get a much more kind of high definition feel. And there was when this effect started, there was a big habit of ramping it up, overcooking, really, making it sort of so that you almost kind of reeled from it. Another example is selective color or spot coloring, where you pick just a particular color in a photo and you black and white everything else, but then maybe, in the wedding photos it's the classic, the red rose, when everything else is in black and white. The problem is after a while it becomes absolutely done to death because everybody's doing it. And if the only thing that's really keeping your photo elevated is a Photoshop effect that anybody can replicate, then it's not really doing you any favors. You need to have a stronger photo underneath it. Then sometimes maybe things like spot color or things like the Orton effect or things like HDR can really emphasize and add to the impact of the photo. But you've got to make sure that you're using the right effect for the right photo. And in this case, I don't think that the Orton effect is playing in your favor, because it's the grass that gets it all rather than the gravestones. And to get the gravestones, what you really needed was to have the light, maybe a streak of sunlight or moonlight. That would be harder to get, but certainly sunlight sort of hitting the corners or the edges of the gravestones. So I hope that helps. I hope that gives you some ideas, something to play around with. Okay, so that's HDR, high dynamic range, Gary. Thank you, Gary. Yes, HDR, high dynamic range, which is about the idea that you're kind of taking the deep darks, the shadows, and bringing them back into visual range again, and you're taking the highlights, which again might have blown out, and pushing them back into a visual range. So you're getting more detail at either ends of the extreme. High dynamic range gives you a better range of the tones. So yes, and it's a great technique, but can very easily lead to overcooking. But anyway, that was more of a tangent. The real point on this is about getting the editing effect you want in order to create the visual. Get the editing effect you want in order to emphasize the story you want. Actually, I know what I was going to do. I'll come back again a sec. What I want to show you is how the effect ended up in a kind of lighting. When I was talking about portraiture, I said that the effect was used then. And I can show you very quickly that notion of a kind of Hollywood lighting as such, where we do exactly the same thing. And what I'll do here is we'll take just this little photo of my daughter. This was taken 8 years ago. She's a young woman now. She was in her teens. This is my daughter Meg. Just playing around. Quick photo. I've got, I think it's a 2 light setup. Yeah, it looks like there's a main light coming in from the right here, and then I've got a light coming in over the shoulder to the back here, which is catching a little bit of edge here. Now, what I was trying to do here, I remember taking this photo while I was playing around with lighting and editing to try and get a sort of slightly Hollywood-esque kind of photo. So the first thing you want to do is turn it to black and white. So I'll just, first of all, let's just crop it in a little bit. There's a little bit of shadow down the bottom here, which I don't really need. Pull that in a little bit. Yeah, that'll do. Okay, so into Camera Raw as the shortcut, add a little bit of vignette around it, and black and white it. So take the saturation, pull that down. Looks a little bit dark. I'll just hit auto there. Okay, I'll bring the exposure up a little bit, take the highlights down a little bit more. And there we have roughly a very quick black and white photo version from there to there. But the interesting bit, and this is what I wanted to show you, was if I duplicate that layer and now I blur it in exactly the way we were going to do it before. So I blur that, let's take that up a little bit more, something like that. And then I go to overlay. Now again, dark's a little bit dark, so I'll just put a levels bit in between and bring a little bit out of the shadows, like that. So now what you can see is that glowing effect onto a portrait. If I just group those together, so we've gone from that to that. Let's zoom in a little bit more. Now, I mean, one of the other effects is essentially the old Vaseline on the lens, or taking a stocking, a lady's stocking, and placing it over the lens as well, to create a sort of dreamy soft focus effect. But what you can see here is that, again, it's having the most effect where the light is at its brightest, where the light is catching the hair, where the light is catching little bits of skin. Each of these sort of highlights appears to be glowing. And that extra glow, you know, we do, and that glowing on a black and white portrait, we tend to recognize as very much a kind of, you know, Hollywood style, you know, 30s, 40s style of photo. You know, this is done in 30 seconds, just mucking around quickly. Obviously, you would play with it more if you really want to go for that effect. But as a quick example, so that's just to sort of go back and emphasize what I was saying about earlier, which is the Orton effect is essentially taking this effect but then applying it to landscapes. There's nothing wrong with that. You can do that with, you know, there are, you know, the only rules with photography are, does it work? Do you like it? If it works and you like it, then that's fine. There isn't a right or wrong. Of course, there are purists who will say it can only be done one way rather than another, but, you know, it's a matter of taste. Anyway, I did just want to show you that because I thought it was kind of interesting, just to let you know that you can apply that kind of effect in whatever way you want. So that's pretty much it. Any more comments? There we go. Oh, last couple of things here. Right, Stephen Ross has come in. That was interesting. Thanks, Kim. Well, thank you, Stephen. And Terry, thank you. Thank you, Terry. Stephen, have pictures ready to send. Great. Well, put them in then, Stephen. And great session from Becca. Thank you, Becca. Much appreciated. That brings us to the end of episode 23. If you found this interesting, do please consider the idea of buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres to help support the podcasts. I will be recording, well, this is recorded, so I'll be editing it tonight and putting it on YouTube tomorrow. Make sure you get if you would like to be included in the critique feedback section next week, make sure you get your pictures in. My apologies to, where are we? Prasad? Yes, Prasad, you put, I know you put some photos in earlier, but they basically turned up only about an hour and a half or so before we were actually going live, and so I didn't have time to work out an answer that I think would be satisfying for you. So I'll include them in next week's. So make sure, if you're interested, put your pictures and your questions into the Facebook group, Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. If you've not already joined, just type in Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres into Facebook search and you'll find the group easily enough. That's pretty much it. Next week, there's a set of pictures I did for local business, which might be cropping up in a magazine later this week. If it does, I'll talk about that next week. And if it's the following week, well, then I'll probably talk about that instead. So, thank you very much for joining me. And hope to see you all next week. Take care. Cheerio then. Bye bye.